So I remember. All right, I think we can start getting going. Some guys might trickle in here in the next little bit, but thanks for joining us, everyone, this morning on January 8th. My name's Blair Baylog. I'm a seed specialist here at Stamp Seeds. This is the Planter Clinic and Agronomy update with Dave Shapla. He is an agronomist for Thunder Seed, and happy to have him joining us here to speak about everything on top of corn here. So, no, I'll hand it over right to Dave right away, as it has a lot to go over. So, Dave, I have made it shareable there for you if you want to get going on that. But
Perfect. You guys can see that okay?
Nope. Here,
How about now? You see my screen there now?
I cannot. Here, 1 second. Maybe I'll stop sharing. There you go.
All right. Perfect. So thanks, Blair and Greg, for having me be part of your webinar series, we'll say. Yeah, so I'm Dave. I'm the provincial agronomist with Thunder Seed here. I'm based out of Portage La Prairie, Manitoba. So basically in the middle of Manitoba. I cover the whole province here, and then I peek into Saskatchewan a little bit, and now we're starting to work into Eastern Canada as well. So it's making things kind of fun and interesting. Um, a little background on me. I started with Thunder in 2017. Prior to that, I was working with a retail who we were Pioneer seed hybrid dealers. And then we switched over to Thunder Seed. We finally saw the light, so switched over to them. Prior to that, doing agronomy in South Central Manitoba for a couple different companies. So I've been in the industry for about 20 plus years now, 25 years or so. So perfect. And Blair said, we're going to talk about planters, planter setups, things to look for as we start rolling into spring, or the planters are getting pulled into the shop this winter. And then we'll talk a little bit about nutrients as well. I didn't want to overlap too much on the last one that we did together. So with that, we'll start rolling. If anybody has questions, or Blair, you see anything that pops up in your chat there, just let me know, and we can expand on anything a little more.
Yep, sounds good.
So first of all, planters, lots of different colors, tons of different options to choose from, much like everything else. You can go in the top left there, we got fancy DB John Deere planter. Right down to in the middle picture, we have an older, probably, I don't know if it's a 7200 or not, but an older John Deere planter. My thing is always, nowadays, you can make an old planter plant just as good as a brand new $1 million planter. So there's lots of things you can tweak, add on, and make sure that you're doing the right job, because you only get one crack at planting. So we want to make sure that seed's just perfect. So planting corn, I talked a little bit about this, I think, on the last webinar. The goal is to have seeds evenly distributed. That spacing between corn seeds and plants is absolutely crucial. Corn's a big plant, but it hates competition. So if you have two that are too close together, they just compete all year long. Place consistently at a 2-inch depth. That's always my recommendation, is 2 inches. You can go a little shallower if you're in a really heavy clay and you're afraid of crusting over. You can go like 1.6 or 1.75 inches minimum. If you go any shallower than that, you start getting improper root development. So you want to make sure you're aiming for that 2 inch if you can. You can go deeper if you have to. If you're chasing some moisture, you can go deeper as well. So, excuse me. ensure proper seed to soil contact for germination. That's like any crop. We see it more often in corn on some really dry conditions, and we'll talk about that later, where if you can't close the furrow properly, then you start getting uneven emergence. Plant when soil environment conditions are right. Like this is a big one. Cold stress can hurt the vigor of corn tremendously. We see it almost every year. You want to wait until soil temperature is 10 degrees or more at 2 inches or at your planting depth. Best way to check that is at about 11 o'clock in the morning. That's your average kind of, yeah, 11:30. That's your average temperature in a 24-hour period. So if you're checking soil temps and you go out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you say, hey, my soil's 10 degrees at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we're good to go. Well, chances that's the warmest it's going to get. So you might want to give it a couple more days. I always want to watch instead of necessarily just going by that 10 degrees Celsius, though. What I like to do is look at the next 2-3 days in the forecast. If you've got a warming trend, you're gonna have some nice sunny days. The soil's gonna keep warming, and it's only at 8 degrees. Go ahead and plant your corn if it's fit. If it's not too wet or anything like that, go ahead and plant your corn. If your soil is 10 degrees, but you see the next 2 days are going to be cooling off, or maybe we're going to get one of those, May flurries that we see coming through sometimes. Hold off, keep it in the bag, and then wait till that cold front or that system comes through, and then go ahead and plant. So you can play with that a little bit, but always keep an eye on that 2-day forecast and give yourself some time there. Uneven planting depth and inconsistency to soil contact, like I said, can cause uneven emergence, which is we're losing yield right away with corn if that happens. So we'll do everything we can to get those seeds all at the same place, evenly spaced out. So precision planting philosophy. It's actually pretty straightforward. First, you want to clean the furrow. So especially if you're in a zero till or min till situation, there's some row cleaners there on the front. You want to make sure that you get all that trash out of the way, so you're eliminating any hairpinning or anything like that that could be going on. Two, create that trench. You want that nice firm V trench. Place the seed properly right at the bottom of the trench. All the seeds are going right to the bottom at the same place. And then lastly, you want to close that furrow. So you want to make sure that that furrow is getting squeezed from the bottom of the trench going up. And then where we see issues with that is under real dry conditions or some light soil sometimes. And then as well as under some wetter, heavy clay conditions, sometimes we really struggle closing those furrows. So we'll talk about a couple different options to help us with that. So first off, just wanted to show some of the issues with emergence. So the first picture on the left here, we're seeing some plants that are already almost, they've got a second leaf poking out there. Some are just coming through the ground. So, and on the right hand side, we have sticks with numbers on them. So this is what we call a flag test. So what happened here is somebody went out, corn's emerging, everything that's emerging on the first day, they're putting a stick with the number 1. On the second day, they're flagging it again, same time, 24 hours later, they put a number 2, second day, and so on and so forth until the corn's all emerged. And I did this a few years ago, so this was in 2020. So just to show you, same thing. I went out with some orange flags on the first day that the corn was coming up, May 26th. Second day, I went back and added the different colors. So my blue flags for my second day. 28th, I came back, so I added some yellow flags there for my third. Added in some purple for my fourth. And at this time, when you got 4 days, you're already losing some yield. And then I came back even later. And then as you can see the picture on the left, like May 29th, there's some that are just poking through. And then we've got some that have a couple leaves on either side. So that poor little plant in the middle is going to be struggling all year long. This is what it looks like later on in the year. So as you can tell on the left-hand picture, that's in June. So we have a V5 plant on the right and then a V7 plant on the left. So that late emerger, it's only 2 leaf stages, but that late emerger never catches up. It just always stays smaller. It's kind of it's going to be the runt of the litter. It's getting out competed for water. It's getting out competed for sunlight. So it's really going to struggle to come back, and it's not going to yield very much. And it's actually robbing some yield from the first emerging one. Then you look again a month later, or a couple months later in August, and again, that plant just doesn't amount to anything. So it's very important to get everything off. You want your plants emerging optimally within the same day, but it's pretty rare. If we can get it.
Here. And, I guess to start with, probably the majority of the volume displaced is something that we're already selling.
Is that a question for me, or I think that's just some background, right, Claire?
Yeah, that was just background.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so as you can see there in August, that plant's just not going to amount to anything anymore. So yield loss from an even emergence. So these are some years that I picked from that same field where I did the flag test. As you can see, how I did it is that day one. So those are plants that, the middle plant emerged the same day as the two beside it. We have a normal ear, no worries there. Day two, so on either side, the plants emerged on day one. The one in the middle emerged on day two. So same thing, very little difference. Actually, the ears are the same size right now. And then the next day three is, each plant came up on day one. The middle one came out 3 days later. We're starting to see those ears shrink down on that plant. And then by day four, you're really losing um, some length there. And so it doesn't take very long to really start affecting yield. So that's why we really harp on making sure your planters are set properly and you're planting into some good conditions. And then day 8, which hopefully you don't have very many of those coming along, those really don't do anything. Those are wet. They don't add up to much. They just cause more of a pain than anything else. There's some MAFRA data, Ontario data that's out there, and says you get 6.6 to 8% yield loss from plants emerging on day 2. I don't know that we see that big of a hit here in Manitoba, but I would say by day 3 or 4, you're definitely seeing that or more. So, same 12 to 14% yield loss on plants emerging day 3 when neighboring plants are on the first day. Same, not sure if we see quite that much here in Manitoba, but it's definitely not too far off, I think, for us. So we always talk in corn about that picket fence stand. That top picture, you see there's 2 plants that are really close together, and then you have a single one and 2 more that are together. When those corn plants side by side like that are too close, they just don't yield as much. They're just competing with each other all the time. What you're aiming for is that bottom picture, that total nice, perfect picket stand. Everything is spaced out evenly, just like a picket fence, of course. So planter maintenance and setup, lots of little things you can do that are pretty simple to look at. Number one is your parallel linkage arms, row units. You got to check them for excessive play. So when your row units are up, or your machine's up, folded up in the shop, just walk behind it, take your row units, shake it from side to side, and see if there's a whole lot of play in there. If there is, you see where those red arrows are, there's some bushings in there you can change. Sometimes what happens if the bushings wear out, then you start wearing into those parallel linkage arms. Those need to be replaced. If you have too much side to side motion, that creates chatter in your row unit. You're not going to be placing the seed at the right depth, all those things. So again, that's number one to check, is make sure that those things are nice and tight still. Disc openers you got to make sure they're not worn out. So the easiest way is to use a business card or a piece of paper folded in half. You go from the back of the opener, slide it in from the back until that card touches the discs, make a line. Then you do the same. You go from the front at the top, slide it down, make a line on your disc. That distance should be about 1.5 to 2.5 inches. So at that distance, you're making a really nice V clean furrow trench. If that gap is too big, you're going to end up with a wavy bottom in your furrow, so a bit of a W look to it instead of a true V. So you might have some seeds that are fall at the bottom of the W, and then some will be caught up top. So you can look at adjusting that. There are some shims in there that you can add in, pull out if you need to. You got to be careful. If you pull out too many shims, well, then you're going to start rubbing those discs on your cleaner in the middle or your seed tube. So you got to watch that a little bit. As for the diameter of the discs, every manufacturer is different. So please refer back to your manufacturer as to what diameter those discs should be, and go from there. There's as much too as in the past couple years, I've noticed some people saying that you got to really watch when you order some new discs for your planter. If the dealer has a whole bin of them, go out and check those discs. Don't just take them. Like if you have a 12-row planter, you don't just grab 24, lay them on the floor, take a look at them, because some of the manufacturing processes or where they're coming from sometimes aren't as accurate as they used to be. So sometimes there is a warp in the discs a little bit. So make sure you lay them on the floor and take a look and see that they are perfectly flat. One more thing I just added in this because it's a nice picture diagram is that red arrow is pointing to what we call a mustache. These tend to wear out too on John Deere planters. This is what, once you set your depth, this is what's keeping that gauge wheel from going up any further. So once those get wore out, even if you're setting your depth at 2 inches, if that mustache or that part is wore out, that gauge wheel might be pushing up higher than it should be. So that's another thing that you can easily check when you've got those gauge wheels off and you're checking your discs. So how to perform a block test. This is, as your planter wears out, things get a little sloppy. Just because, at the back of the planter, so many holes on one side, so many holes on the other side. When you're adjusting your T-handle at the back, you say, well, this is 2 inches. Like, since my planter was new, this is where I put it for 2 inches. As things loosen up, that's not necessarily true anymore. So you got to do a block test to see that it's actually at the right spot. So I'm going to try and play a video. I'm hoping it's going to work here. It's not. Okay, so much for that. Okay, you're back to my presentation screen there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So in the quick and dirty, what you can do is this guy's using 4x4s here. You can use a 2x4 as well. Loosen up your T-handle at the back of the planter. You put your planter down on those. You put one block under each gauge wheel. Put the planter down. Let's say you want 1.5 inches, right? You want to know where 1.5 inches is. Use 2x4 on each side of the gauge wheel. Put the planter down, and then you can adjust your T-handle back till it tightens up. And then that's where 2 inches is, or 1.5 inches is. Pardon me. Mark where the holes are, because each row might be starting to wear a little different. So just because it's perfect on one row doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to be the same. So you just do this across the planter. This guy's using a 4x4. He can mark 2 inches down. He's got a line on that 4x4 at 2 inches. You can do that as well. Same thing. Loosen up your T-handle, put your planter down to where your discs are at that 2-inch mark. Adjust your T-handle back to where it's tight. Mark it off with a paint pen or something at the back. So you know where each row unit is set at 2 inches. And then if you need an extra 1/4 inch, then you go from there. Hex shaft alignment. So if you open up your planter, make sure that these hex shafts that run your row units on each section of your planter line up properly. As you can see here, one dips a little lower than the other once the planter is open. So what this can lead to is that, one, there's a little excess wear, and B, it could cause your hex shaft to not rotate evenly. What'll happen is one will spin a little faster when it gets to one spot, just because the way they line up. So all these little things can lead to getting misplaced seeds or a couple skips, because it's making your meter chatter a little bit. So these are things that are easily adjustable and easy to check. Closing wheel alignment. So this is one that I see every year. Find an old piece of pavement or concrete in the yard somewhere, put your planter down, drive ahead a few feet, and then what'll happen is it'll scratch that concrete, and you can see in the bottom of the picture there, you want that line to be perfectly in the center of those two closing wheels. Those closing wheels are adjustable from side to side, so you can easily do that. This is a very important step to make sure that that furrow is perfectly in the middle. What happens is if those closing wheels are a little off kilter, especially in dry conditions and lighter soil, those closing wheels, instead of closing the furrow, squeezing it shut from the bottom up like they're designed to do, if they're off kilter, it almost acts like a grader on the road. It starts kicking some dry dirt into that furrow. If it rains afterwards, no big deal. However, if it doesn't rain for a while, like we've had a couple of dry springs here in some spots, what'll happen is you'll have some seed the furrow will be closed properly and the seed will be in moisture, so those will germinate. You'll have some seed where there was dry dirt put on top of it, so it's not going to germinate, and then that leads to uneven emergence again. So this is another quick and dirty way to take a look at things and make sure that they're lined up properly. Seed tubes, another quick, easy check. We don't do that very often. You'll see on the left-hand side, actually the one picture is a precision bullseye seed tube. On the right-hand side is a stock tube, but it's been wearing up against the disc and just in the furrow, so in the dirt. So you can see the bottom edge start to crack. That's one thing that you definitely don't. If you see that happening, it's time to change those tubes out, because that can change or cause misplaced seed or some seed bounce. On the right hand side, I don't know if I can have trying to set up my pointer here. So I don't know if you can see this, but on John Deere planters especially, what you'll notice is because of where the seed gets dropped in the way the disc is set up, and the seed gets dropped right down in this corner of the seed tube. So what you can see is after a couple years, or after a few years or lots of acres, you'll start wearing a groove. The seed will actually wear a groove in this plastic. So if you have that happening, that's the same. The seed hits that groove, and then you'll start getting some seed bounce coming down the tube as you go along. And if you have some seed bounce happening, that means you're gonna have some misplaced seeds come at the bottom of the trench. So you want to make sure if you see anything here, it's anywhere on your seed tube in those corners at the top, time to switch them out. Meter drives, we're working kind of our way to the back of the planter here. Just check your chains. If you have a chain drive planter, make sure there's no links that are tight or anything like that. Same if you have a flex drive, let's say on your planter, take those flex drives out, turn them by hand. They should turn freely. They're usually pretty snug, but you should be able to turn them. They shouldn't have any sticky spots or anything like that in them. What happens is if you have a bad link or two, or you have a flex drive that's got some sticky spots, is that meter is going to actually start chattering like this, and it could end up being some misplaced seeds again, or some skips as those seeds get knocked off prematurely off that disc. So make sure you check all your chains every spring. Lid seals. This is a picture of a John Deere, pretty stock or standard John Deere lid seal. Photos are courtesy Greenlee Equipment here. They had some pretty nice pictures. Things you got to watch is same thing. The seals are plastic, so they dry out. They get brittle. They get hard. The John Deere seals I find are made of a harder plastic as well. So the minute they start to wear, they don't seal as nicely. Precision planting lid seals I find are made with a softer plastic. They seem to seal a little better. They're a little more forgiving. But open up your lids, take a look, and you see where the two red arrows are. They're that's usually where we start seeing some cracking, is in those 90-degree kind of bends. So take a look. If they're cracked, take those seals out, replace them. Because if you start having a leaky seal, same thing. You might be setting your planter vac at whatever you got, let's say 12 inches of vac for a Pro Max 40. If you do that one row isn't getting the vac that it needs because it's got too much air leakage. So again, you're probably going to end up with some skips on that row. So go across the whole planter, make sure you check your lid seals and everything's closing and sealing properly. Metering units, if you've never done it, try and get your meters checked. They can all be calibrated. You put them on, this is a meter or newer version of the Meter Max machine that Precision Planting has, or some of your dealers might be able to do this for you. Basically, they put your meter on there, run some seed through, and then they're going to be able to see how your singulation is. They can dial, they can dial up pressures up and down, speed up and down to match your planting conditions, or your planting speed. They can even use your seed size. If you have your seed, when you bring in your meter, they'll run your actual seed, so they can really dial in and tell you what your settings will be. It's a quick and easy way to really start pinpointing any meter issues for singulation. They can usually run any vac planter, or even like positive pressure like Great Plains or White. They can run those as well. Again, I don't. So that quick video, I apologize for the shakiness. That was my phone that was acting up those days. But when we used to sell precision planting parts, we ran a ton of meters. So this is from one grower. And as you could tell, like those seeds are just flying by there. So the singulator, the plates, all those things make a huge difference. Even that hub in the middle of your meter that the plate sits on, sometimes you'll end up that those hubs are not sitting quite flat. So what happens is your plate starts doing this in the meter. So that can affect singulation as well. So it's just nice to be able to get your meters on these machines, get them tested, and then it points out some of the issues. As you could tell here on this meter, like it's running 100% singulation. It's like going at 5 miles an hour. This is actually a precision ESET, so we're running lots of vac on there too, 18 inches of vac, just planting perfect. So you know that the meter runs right. So if you're having issues in the field, may not be the meter, it may be one of your drives, it may be something else that's leading to those problems. So just a good thing to do if you haven't done that yet or ever. Now, once we're in the field, we want to make sure that planter is running level. So your parallel linkage arm should be running flat to the ground. The planter mainframe should be level or pitched very slightly down to the front. It's very important to make sure that the wing sections and center sections are level. We're seeing this with some central commodity planters now carrying a lot of weight. If you got a liquid tank in the middle too, it's a lot of weight on that center section. GPS now and auto steer markers for some people are way of the past. So we're taking the markers or the weight off the end of the wings. So especially on wider planters, we're running, let's say, a 60-foot planter. You've got all that weight right in the middle on the tires, and then very little weight on the outside. So what can happen is once you take the markers off, is that your planter is actually going to sit a little bit like this. So you might have to put some suitcase weights on the end or something like that just to get a bit more weight out on those wings. Box planters, not quite as bad because the weight's more evenly distributed that way. This should all be done in the field. Put your planter down, take a look, drive ahead. Issues that can cause if your planter is tipping forward a little bit. If you have row cleaners on it, like this planter, this planter has a just a coulter in the front. But if it's pitching down too much, well, then your row cleaners are probably too aggressive. And then at the back, you're gonna have trouble closing that furrow because your closing wheels aren't gonna have enough pressure to push down. If it's the other way, if it's pitched back too much, same thing. Your row cleaners aren't going to be as effective. You probably have way too much pressure on your closing wheels at the back. So you want to make sure that those parallel linkage arms and that main frame is running parallel to the ground or flat. Just a picture here of a planter. As you can tell, this planter has been converted from a 3-point hitch to a hitch to put on this 4-wheel drive. So it looks like it's pitching up, but it's actually running pretty flat. You can see all those boxes are nice and level. Row cleaners are just tickling the top of the dirt.
Hey, Dave, have you seen planters use like airbags in that?
The planters with
Or
airbags?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. This planter has to be just spring down pressure.
yeah,
But there's active pneumatic down pressure now. There's actually hydraulic down force, delta force you can put on
okay,
your planter,
yeah,
which all helps. We'll talk a little bit about setting down pressure and down force here in a
okay,
couple slides, I
okay. I'm
think.
getting
I'll
ahead of
touch
it.
on that. No, it's good. It's perfect. So as you can see, I'll run this video again. He's actually he's planting across his fertilizer row. So he banded fertilizer going one way. Now he's planting across going the other way. So you could see that those row units were bouncing a little bit, not too bad. He did slow down his speed when he was doing this part to try and get there. But you can see that the planter's running fairly flat. Everything's running quite true. So here's another quick clip. Now he's running perpendicular in the same direction as what was the fertilizer that was banded. So sorry for the loudness there, the old straight pipe 9350. So but you could tell the boxes, very little movement up and down on those boxes as he's going down the field here now. So the old adage is always you should be able to put a pop can or something on the back of your box or on your meter. And when you get to the other end of the field, it should still be on there. If it's not, it means that you're either driving too fast or it's too rough. Maybe you don't have enough down pressure, which we're going to get into. You want to make sure you don't have a lot of unit bounce. If you are, it means that, that whole unit's bouncing up and down, which means your furrow's bouncing up and down, which means you're getting uneven seed depth, which means uneven emergence, which is what we're trying to get away from. So down pressure, again, this is something that's got to be checked in the field. Every field will be different. Even headlands, like when you're planting your headlands and then you start going inside the field, like that could be different, right? Because our headlands are always usually harder. Put your planter down, drive ahead for a bit, stop with the planter in the ground. You should be able to turn those gauge wheels by hand. They should be stiff and hard to turn, but you should still be able to turn them. If they're really easy to turn, you don't have enough down pressure, which means that ground contact is going to fluctuate. And again, that's going to vary your seating depth. If they're impossible to turn, you've got too much down pressure, which is going to lead to sidewall compaction, premature bearing wear, things like that. So always get out, check. Of course, our fields can be quite variable, especially in a minimum till or even a no-till situation. That can vary across the field, but check and make sure that you always have to have good soil contact with those gauge wheels. This is where it comes into, like, this planter, for example, has those airbags, right? So if it's active pneumatic, it can actually, you can set it so it'll change as that planter is going through the soil, as it changes soil types or conditions. The planter's got weight pins on it, so it can actually feel or measures how hard it's pressing against the ground or how hard the ground is pressing back up against the planter. If you get into a real hard area and the computer or your monitor notices that you're losing some ground contact, it can actually increase the pressure in the airbags. Or if you have delta force in your hydraulics, it'll push down on those units harder. Make sure you have that consistent margin all the time. You want that planter always pushing against the ground at the same weight going across the whole field. So that's some of the advantages with the newer technology as we move forward. Issues closing furrows, I mentioned them quickly at the start. So planting in very dry conditions or very wet conditions, of course, can lead to all kinds of issues. Heavy clay soils are the most prone to closing issues, I find. They're just not forgiving, especially when they're wet. They're so hard to close. That, or if you can get them closed, if you don't get a rain right away, they dry up and then they crack open again. So that leads to, again, delayed emergence because those seeds are just sitting there in the dry ground. You may have to try, depending on your seeding conditions and your field conditions and soil types, you may have to try different closing wheel combinations in order to really maximize the effect. On the left hand side, that picture, you just see the standard two plastic smooth closing wheels side by side. They work great for a lot of conditions. Lighter soils work fantastic. In the middle here, we've got two spoke wheels, quite aggressive for the most part. They really break up those sidewalls. So if you're in some really heavy clay and you're planting, it's wet a lot, you could try that. You have to watch. What I have seen though sometimes is those spike wheels can be too aggressive. And then when you end up breaking up that sidewall, it ends up pulling the seed out of the furrow a little bit. So that's one thing you really have to watch for. Then on the right, again, a different type of closing. It's still a spike closing wheel, but a different arrangement a little bit. And then with a smooth on the one side. So what that allows a lot of times is that you can actually break up one side of the sidewall, the other side closes it nicely, and then you don't have it's not quite as aggressive at pulling dirt up around that furrow. John Deere, and there's a couple other manufacturers as well where you can actually stagger those wheels, so you can run a spiked one slightly ahead of your smooth walled one. All those things can be adjusted to meet your field condition or the soil type that you're planting on. So that, in a nutshell, that's kind of what I had when it came to planters. If you're looking at precision planting or wanting to update your planter, things like that, I know Corn Ranches, Jared's on the call, I see here now. Here's his contact info, and Rogers as well. If you're thinking about planter parts or want to do things like that, make sure you give these guys a call. They can hook you up or point you in the right direction too. There's just a lot you can do, even if you have an old planter still. Like I said earlier, you can make an older planter plant just as good as $1 million brand new planter. So don't feel like you have to go out and run out and spend a ton of money. There's lots of things that you can do along the way to help your emergence and your getting that seed in the furrow. So any questions before I jump into nutrients a little bit here to finish off?
I got one.
Sure.
What's the deepest you would plant when you're chasing moisture?
Soil type dependent, of course.
Yeah,
On lighter soils, like you can plant corn 3.5 inches, and it'll make
yeah,
its way through, no problem. If you have to on clays, I guess you can get down to 3 inches. Like I have seen it. Corn can push through. It's not like a bean, of course. It doesn't push through as nicely as a bean. The biggest thing with dry clay is that if you plant it at 3 inches and then unfortunately we get that pounding rain after,
yeah,
that's when we're gonna have those crusting or emergence issues, right? So,
for sure.
but
Yeah,
but you can't go down there to chase it. Will push through. It's pretty surprising. What can happen again is if you do end up with some crusting, is you'll see that, or you get a rain, and then it dries up, the clay will actually start to crack. The corn, as that spike is coming through, can actually sense light. So the minute it can sense some light, it starts to unfurl and open its leaves. So what can happen is on really hard clays, and you have that cracking on top, sometimes the light penetrates in a little bit. So the corn starts to unfurl underground. And then once it's unfurled, then it really has a hard time penetrating through.
Okay.
So that's one thing you have to watch. The sands are a little more, the lighter soils are a little more, they're a little easier to deal with, we'll say.
Yeah.
That's the challenge with the clay soil, but you can get down there.
Dave, do you mind if I chime in a little bit?
Go for it.
Okay. I just kind of want to introduce myself. I'm Jared Hovde. My company and Roger. We work with Blair and Greg as well as Dave in the Thunder Seed department, but also with the planters. I think Dave did a pretty good job. I was a little bit late to the party here, unfortunately. I had some technical difficulties, but I got here. The biggest thing about planter maintenance in my mind is preserving the yield that's already in the bag. The biggest yield potential of that crop that you're going to have is when the seed is still in the bag. And everything we do after, and Dave's going to talk about some of the agronomics around corn, but on the planter side of things, it's what is your planter maintenance and what are the steps that you're taking to preserve the yield that seed has. We're only going to be planting 32,000 seeds per acre, and in some cases we're planting less than 32,000 seeds per acre. So it's very important that every one of those seeds comes out within the 48-hour period. It's important that we're not getting skips in the field. We're important that we're not getting doubles in the field as well, and getting that really good picket fence stand like Dave talked about, because that yield potential in corn can be, anything is possible in some regards to when you're talking about corn. So no, I think Dave touched on lots of good planter maintenance strategies and things to look for in your planter. So he's done a good job so far. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Jared. Perfect. All right. I'll roll into some nutrient management stuff here a little bit. We talked a lot on the agronomy side in our last webinar, so I'll just do a bit of nutrient stuff that we didn't touch on last time. Perfect. So first of all, you need to know your yield goals and have a starting point as to what you have for residual nutrients. So depending on the field, you have some fields that are always dry. Let's say your yield, your potential is maybe not quite as high as on some stuff that is under a pivot, right? If you've got some irrigation, you can control the water, you can really put the boots to it. Residual nutrients, soil testing, huge fan of soil testing. You got to know where you're starting from. Good indicator. Well, my first point here, if it falls under manure management plan, I don't know if you have those in Alberta, but for here are some of our dairies and our larger hog operations, things like that, have to submit their plans to the province. So they're stuck. They have to do their soil testing. But if not, it's just a very good indicator, and it's cheap. Like you're looking at maybe a couple $100 a field. So it's not a huge expense, especially at the price of fertilizer. You want to make sure that you're not over fertilizing or under fertilizing. You want to put the right amount. It's good to get micronutrients tested once in a while as well, to give you a baseline as to where you are, especially if you're growing some specialty crops. And again, 0 to 6 and then a 6 to 24 inch. So nutrients uptake and removal. So we all know Liebig's law of the minimum here. We have this bucket with all our nutrients in it. The one that is the shorting the crop. That's as much as you're going to get. So you want to make sure that you have a total balanced approach from your macronutrients right down to your micros. There's many tools to help decide where you should be for nutrients. Corn hybrids, I find, are getting quite a bit more efficient at nitrogen use. We used to be like 1.2 pounds per bushel all the time. Now we're, depending on how the fertilizer is placed, we're down to like 0.8 to a pound of nitrogen per bushel is kind of what we're looking at. So on the right hand side here is an app that you can get online, kind of just showing a few nutrient removal rates. Here's a newer one, a newer updated version, we'll call it. So it's the Prairie Nutrient Calculator. This is online. I just took a snapshot of it because I didn't know if it would link across or not, but you'll see down the left-hand side, you can pick your crop, you can pick your yield goal, and then it shows the actual removal of that crop. This is not the uptake, the total uptake of what's going to happen in the year. This is the removal. This is what's coming off that field. So at bare minimum, you're going to be needing to put down this amount of nutrients. So at 175 pound corn crop, you're going to be hauling off that field 140 pounds of nitrogen, 67 pounds an acre of P2O5, 44 pounds of potash, 11 pounds of sulfur, and then some micros to go with it. So if you think of this and then plus everything else that plant will need to grow during the year, it can add up pretty quick. There's a lot of nutrients needed for a full corn crop. Corn nitrogen uptake. These lines. This actually comes from John Hurd, who was our provincial fertility specialist here in Manitoba. The lines that you see, the arrows, are basically just representing the different times that you can band your fertilizer or get fertilizer on the crop. So you can put it in the fall, the red line. You can band it, broadcast it, work it in. Would be the blue line. The green, the first green arrow would be at planting time. The green arrow, like at the end of June, this would be when you're doing your, let's say you're putting fertilizer down, banding it between the rows using anhydrous or a liquid, something like that. And then that yellow line later in the season would be if you're going in when that corn is taller and you're using something like a wide drop or some sort of system on your sprayer. So that's kind of where we're looking at the 3 uptakes. You can see the nitrogen curve on corn. The biggest uptake is later in the year. So that's why if your soils are very prone to leaching, you're on irrigation, let's say, if you want to fertigate, that's a great way to do it. If you're putting all your fertilizer ahead of time, try and use a more stabilized source, like try using some ESN, some super use, something like that. If you're on lighter soils prone to leaching, just that way you can try and keep that nitrogen in place longer in the season. Nice thing about corn, deep rooted crop, it can go down and get some deeper rooted or some nutrients that are leached down deeper in the soil. But I just wanted to show this to see when that nutrient uptake is actually occurring. So again, we talked about some nitrogen applications, different types of fertilizer, manure, synthetic, when you want to apply it. The biggest thing is to put it at the right place, right time, right source, at the right rate. So the old 4R stewardship. Important to factor in losses when calculating your rates. So if you're going to band, let's say you're banding in the fall or early spring, you're on a soil that's prone to leaching, you're going to have to make sure that you're making up for that. If you're broadcasting it in and you want to make sure that you work that fertilizer in at least 1.5 to 2 inches, or else you're going to have some volatility or some losses there. Stabilized end sources do help keep that nitrogen or that nitrate available later in the season. It's less prone to losses. And then make sure when banding nutrients such as nitrogen, synthetic, or even manure, that they're banded deep enough and even throughout the field. So I'll show you a couple pictures in the next slides of what can happen if it's not banded deep enough. And as for even enough, when it comes to manure, especially if you've got some liquid that's going out from a barn or slurry store or things like that, you got to make sure that it's mixed properly and you're not missing any corners, because that will show up. This is a picture that I took. As you can see, I'll try and get my pointer up here again. I don't know if you can see these little strips here going across the field. Oops. So this is anhydrous that was actually banded. It was spring banded on 30 inches. And then he came back and planted his corn. Unfortunately, it wasn't banded deep enough. So these hot bands were actually too close to the seed. So that's why you see these patterns showing up, because the corn just burnt out and is not growing right above the band. So always remember, like this is on, he banded, like I said, anhydrous on 30 inch. So that's a pretty hot band. Like there's a lot of nutrients there. So you got to make sure that that's deep enough that the corn is not gonna burn its roots when it's emerging. Same thing, pre-plant ammonia, just another, that's dripping in the field. Those plants are just dying. Those roots are just getting burned when they're hitting that toxic band. This is one, this is kind of a common practice in our neck of the woods. Grower just pre-banded his fertilizer using his 1890 drill. And of course, I think he was on 10 inch. So it was lining up perfectly with these 30-inch rows, just happened to be. Couldn't band it deep enough. It was only banded about 3 inches deep, so about an inch below where the seed was. And you could tell the corn's just thinning out here. These plants are just not emerging because they're getting some burn from the toxicity from the nitrogen. So make sure you're using, if you're banding it, like narrow rows, slightly off angle, make sure you're 4 inches down, because if you're thinking you're going to be planting at 2 inches, you want to make sure there's at least 2 inches of separation between your fertility bands and that crop. In-season nitrogen, lots of different ways to put it down. You guys have some irrigation, so you can do fertigation. Like I said, you can band anhydrous or some liquid in the crop later on with just a mid-row bander. This is a picture of a wide drop system that you can put on your sprayer, so you can get in a lot later to put that nitrogen on. It's always, these systems are not cheap, for sure, and they're heavy. So one of the issues is always weight. You can do 60 feet at a time. You can't put them across your whole sprayer because it's just too much weight for the boom. So, but they do work. Again, just showing some different ways, like I said, the fertigation or mid-row banding there. So moving on to phosphorus quickly. Important for root and seedling growth, development, plant maturity, and overall health. It is, of course, like every other plant, it's a big building block for photosynthesis. So it's helping make sugars. Removal rate is about 0.4 pounds per bushel on phosphate. So you want to make sure that you're at least putting that down. It's very dependent on mycorrhizal. Corn is very dependent on mycorrhizal fungi to help with pea uptake as well. So when it comes to corn after canola, we do see once in a while some issues here. We try and avoid it if we can, because canola doesn't support the growth of mycorrhizal fungi. So the year that canola is growing in your field, that fungi dies off. It takes a while to build that back up. So if you have real tough conditions in the spring when you're planting your corn after canola, sometimes you can see that corn turns purple and it just kind of sits there for a while. And that's all because that fungi isn't active or it's not there yet. So the corn is struggling to uptake all the phosphorus it needs. We do get away with it of planting corn after canola with high rates of P in the fall or the spring, and then using lots or as much as we can in furrow as well to try and overcome that. Trying to make as much phosphate available for that corn as possible. In furrow liquid is a great option, but you have to watch for sure on your rates. If you're on some lighter textured soils, we're working with a drier spring, probably going to be looking at like maybe 3.5 gallons of 1034 in furrow. If you're in a heavy clay, there's lots of moisture, you can probably put 5 or 6 and you'll probably be okay. I'm talking on 30-inch rows here. There are some low salt content orthophosphates available, like Alpine, for example, that can definitely help. You can put more in furrow, but of course, those products cost more than 1034. So the orthophosphates, like I said, they're easier to handle. They're not as sticky. They have a lower salt content. So if that's worth it for you, fill your boots. They work really well. But it comes down to the grower and mathematics and what the difference is in cost there and pound per actual pounds of phosphate. Corn phosphorus intake, same thing. A lot of it gets put into the seed, so later on. So that's where the bulk is. Of course, phosphate doesn't, we're not going to leach it. It's not going to run out of the soil, so we're going to be okay there. Talking about phosphorus deficiency, so here's some corn after canola. These pictures were taken this last spring or spring of 2023. Really dry area, heavier clay. And you can see how that corn is really being affected. You got that purpling leaf. It's just kind of staying there. So what happens is you have a few corn plants here that are not suffering, they're doing okay. And then you have some beside it that are really suffering. They're going to end up being a few leaf stages behind. So when we talked earlier on about having all your corn nice and even, same stage as it's growing, well, this is going to cause you some issues and some yield loss. Potassium quickly. I don't know if you have some soils that are lower in potassium out your way. Our lighter soil or lighter texture soils here do require quite a bit of potassium. So it does help with disease resistance and stomata regulation. So what that means is that crops, when it gets real hot, we got some water stress issues or some drought issues happening. But potassium is actually what's helping that crop manage that water loss and the transpiration of water. So it is a very important nutrient. It can also assist with the efficiency of other nutrients. So if you short your crop on, you've got all the nitrogen you need, you got all the phosphate that you need on there, but you short it on the potassium side, well, you're basically cutting off your crop at the knees right off the bat. Again, it has a supporting role in photosynthesis and starch formation, so it's important for that kernel fill. And of course, like any other crop, it's a real key for cell wall strength and cellulose production. So it's going to help get that nice firm stalk, make sure that corn stands up well, and we don't have so much green snap maybe later on in the year. These are some Manitoba recommendations for potassium. So I don't know where you guys would fall in on this chart. Maybe Blair, if you want to chime in, feel free. We have a lot of soils in Manitoba here that are in this, we'll say 75 to 125 or 100 ppm range. So we do need quite a bit of potassium we got to add on. So it's just a quick and dirty way to look.
I think it's area dependent here, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some are better than others, but yeah. Some will have to, and that's just the way it goes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then just to stay on time here quickly, sulfur and micronutrients. So sulfur, zinc, copper, they're all very important for corn. Some of these nutrients can be deficient, especially again in those lighter textured soils. Sulfur is a tricky one. It's quite soluble. It can leach down. Also, when you do soil testing, if you happen to hit a gypsum pocket or something like that, your soil test might show that you have a ton of sulfur. But if you have a lighter textured soil or an eroded knoll, that knoll will be short. So my recommendation is if you have light soil, you're probably looking at adding 10 or so pounds, up front, just to make sure. It can be corrected if you do see a micronutrient or a sulfur deficiency and you point it out, you diagnose it in season. Just go out there, you can broadcast some ammonium sulfate over it. If you can get some rain or turn on your pivot, get that sulfur in the ground, it will correct itself. But we do see it show up once in a while. And then deficiencies can have similar symptoms. So one, for example, zinc and sulfur. I find them hard to pinpoint sometimes even. So take some tissue tests. Always pair it with a good soil sample. Do the good areas versus the bad areas. Send them in within a couple days. You have your results back, and you know what nutrient is short or what the issue is. Instead of just saying, "Well, I think it's sulfur," you throw out a bunch of sulfur, and then the problem doesn't go away. That's going to be an issue. Yeah, and think some of the micros. If you have a liquid system on your planter, you can easily throw in some zinc or some copper with your 1034, your Alpine, whatever you're using in furrow. That's a great way to get it in. There's things like Pro Coat you can use on some granular. Broadcasting granular micros, if you have to do it, it's great. I try and avoid it because when you're thinking if you're adding a pound or two of copper on an acre and it's 25% product, you're putting down 4 pounds of product on an acre of soil. So those granules are pretty spread out. So for micros, I much prefer seeing them go in liquid, like into the furrow or impregnated on the fertilizer somehow. Quickly, growth stages, just wanted to touch on that again. I went through this the last time. I prefer the collar method. So as you can see there, that I'll get my pointer out again. This part right here. So once you can see this on a leaf, you can count it as a full collar. If you don't see this point of that leaf, it's not there yet. So here you can see the collars 1, 2, 3 full collars. So this is a V3 plant. The one on the right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can actually see the 6th collar. So that's a V6 plant. Just again, important to know when you guys are doing in-crop herbicide spraying, make sure you check with the manufacturer of the product that you're spraying or read the label, because every company seems to use a different method of counting leaves. BASF uses the leaf over method, so they would be counting this as a leaf, even though there is no collar yet. So just make sure that when you're using your herbicides in season and you're pushing those stages, maybe just talk to your rep and make sure that you're actually counting the way that they want you to count for that proper herbicide. So just a little bit on Thunder Seed to finish off. So we, as I'm sure Blair's been talking to you about all this, we offer a full lineup of corn from 70 to 95 day in Eastern Canada. We offer grain, silage specific hybrids, not a one hybrid fits all like some of the other companies. Being a regional seed company, we're really able to dial things in and offer products that are specific for certain farms or certain areas, which is kind of fun to be a part of. We also offer top performing soybeans across Western Canada and Eastern Canada now as well. The big advantage I think that I find with Thunder Seed is that we work with multiple genetic suppliers and seed partners. So we're able to bring a really nice diverse portfolio of products that maximizes the yield or the margin potential for your operation. So we're not stuck to using one genetic line or one single trait. We have access to all the different traits for soybeans, all the different traits for corn, and multiple different breeders or genetic suppliers that we work with. So we can we talk to our dealers, talk to the growers, see what some of their needs are, and then we can try and find products that fit those needs and bring them in. So that's a massive advantage I think that we have versus some of the other bigger line companies, for sure. And there's our website. I didn't put my contact info on here, but I'm sure you guys can get a hold of Blair if you need to,
Yep.
or Greg, and
Yep.
they can fill you in or pass on the questions or do whatever. But yeah, that's about all I had. So
Okay,
thank you. If
awesome.
there's questions, let me know, and yeah, we can go from
Yeah,
there.
we
Hey,
can
Dave, I
stay
have a
on a little
question
bit.
for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Dave, wonder, you guys have any soybeans to grow along with the corn to, fix some nitrogen? You guys got anything like that?
I have one dealer here that's trying that. He used a forage soybean, which is just basically a very, very late soybean here. The jury's still out. And again, it depends. I know we have another dealer in Alberta there that's playing with it too. I think if it's just for grain production, I don't think it's worth it. It'll be too much competition for what you're going to get. Soybean as a nitrogen fixer, soybean produces just what it needs. It doesn't leave a lot of nitrogen behind. So I don't know. I think there's some other legumes that might work better for that purpose. If you're looking at a silage crop and you're looking to increase protein in your silage, then perhaps that would have a better fit. But right now, for me anyway, the jury's still out. I haven't seen any data that says, yeah, plant your corn on 60-inch rows and come back and put your soybeans on 30s, and we're gonna have a better crop because of it, or we can cut our nitrogen rates. I haven't seen that yet. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Also, what about row spacings? You guys, we're more doing, silage. So, like, what would be the best row spacing for, like, I know some guys are doing 15-inch even, like split, twin rows, 15-inch. Like, what's your take on row spacings?
Yeah, so row spacing, there's data out of the northern states that shows that the further north you push corn production, the narrow rows do tend to out yield wider rows. That's mostly due to we have a shorter growing season. We only have so much sunlight. So in the narrow rows, you just have more leaf material there, capture more sunlight, you're making more sugars, making more starch. So if you're in like 15 is about as tight as I'd want to see it. Like 20s, 22s work really, really well. I think those are great. And then what happens is as you narrow up your rows, especially if you have irrigation, you can control how much water you get. If you're under a narrower row scenario, you can put more a higher plant population down. You still have them spaced very nicely. They're not as crowded as in a 30-inch row. So then you can water it. Those plants still have all the nutrients that they're going to need. They have all the water they're going to need. So, and you're going to have more ears per acre. So you're going to be able to get more yield out of a narrow row corn versus a wider row, especially if you can control the water on it. Some of the challenges, of course, is cost. If you already have a 30-inch planter, then you got to go to a 20, and the headers are more expensive, things like that. So that would be the downside, I guess. But that's my if I was starting to plant corn from scratch, I think I'd definitely look at 20-inch rows up here for sure. We didn't talk about population, of course. You want to make sure that if you go to a 20 and you have irrigation or you can control the water, you're in an area that those fields are naturally have lots of moisture every year. Make sure you push your populations up to take advantage of it. Unless you're growing, we have one or two HDRR, high digestibility silage that we do sell. So those have to be planted at a lower rate because they have a lot of ear flax, so they're meant to have a bit more room, and they're going to compensate because they have more room. So those are the ones that you'd probably watch out. But other than that, if you're in a narrow row, yeah, you can definitely see some yield bumps, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any more questions out there? If you don't get to it today, you can always send me or anyone here a message, and we can get back to you when we can. But yeah, I guess while we're waiting on some other questions, if they're going to come in, I just want to thank Dave here for the presentation. It was well done, going through everything that for the prep for the following seasons. So I imagine some guys are starting to get working on that, or have already done it, just because extended fall kind of allowed for it. So yeah, no, if anyone doesn't have any other questions, we can end it here today. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining in, and thanks Dave for the great presentation.
Thanks for having me, and
Yep.
good luck planting, everybody.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess last thing, if anyone needs seed as of yet, just get a hold of us and we'll take care of you on that side of things. Okay. Awesome. Have a good day, guys.
Thanks, everybody.